and some other medical supplies was launched in a short span of time to meet the domestic demand. Therefore, thanks to all of those measures, the cases of mass infections were avoided. In the past 3 weeks, we've had a positive dynamic between the number of infections and recoveries. We have once again witnessed the professionalism of our doctors during the pandemic. Azerbaijan is ready to share its experience in the treatment of the coronavirus disease with the non-aligned movement member states and remains open to cooperation in this area. Given the decreasing rate of infections among the population and the positive recovery dynamic, a phase-by-phase plan of exit from the special quarantine regime has been enacted. Although the special quarantine regime has been extended until 31st of May, easing of certain restrictions has already started since 27th of April and 4th of May. The socio-economic relief package, worth 3.5 billion manats or $2 billion, has been introduced in Azerbaijan to maintain economic stability, address employment problems, and ensure macroeconomic and financial solidity. Overall, the jobs of some 900,000 public service employees have been secured with full pay, while a major portion of the salaries of 690,000 people in the private sector have been covered by the government. Furthermore, 600,000 low-income, unemployed, and officially employed citizens receive 2 monthly payments based on subsistence minimum. The creation of 90,000 additional paid public jobs is also envisaged till the end of the year for boosting the social protection of the unemployed individuals. The government will issue guarantees for 60% of the loans lent by the banks to the businesses. The taxpayers operating in the areas directly affected by the pandemic will be eligible for tax concessions and tax holidays until the 1st January 2021. These are just a fraction of the measures being undertaken. Overall, the actions of the government are approved highly by our citizens. Dear colleagues, it's very important that in the environment of the pandemic, we maintain the trade between our countries open and ensure seamless transportation of goods. Azerbaijan has already become one of the major transportation and logistics hubs in Eurasia. It has played a key role in the establishment of east-west, north-south, and northwest transportation corridors linking tens of countries. During the pandemic also, Azerbaijan has played its role as a transit logistical center responsibly, ensuring continuous transit of cargo across its territory. In the meantime, the exchange of medical experts and the expertise gained in the fight against the virus, sharing of information and scientific knowledge, as well as extending assistance to the countries in need, is of utmost importance. As the proposed summit declaration reads, the to-be-created task force of the non-aligned movement will compile, in a single database, the information on the medical and humanitarian needs of the member states in the fight against the coronavirus. The information will be shared with the donor nations, international humanitarian relief organizations, and others to facilitate possible assistance. In this regard, to support the non-aligned movement's member states that require assistance in the fight against the coronavirus the most, Azerbaijan announces the additional voluntary financial contribution of $5 million to the World Health Organization. The funds to be released with our approval are allocated to the member states that are in dire need of the assistance within the regional groups in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The Non-Aligned Movement is the second largest international body after the UN General Assembly and brings together 120 countries. We are determined through our joint efforts to boost the non-aligned movement's international significance and the role it plays in the international scene during our chairmanship. Friendship, solidarity, and mutual support among nations play a crucial role here. With your consent, as an example of global solidarity, us, the member states of the non-aligned movement, pursuant to the UN Charter, could propose the holding of a special session of the General Assembly of the United Nations in response to COVID-19 via video conference at the level of the heads of state and government. I once again call for friendship, mutual support, and solidarity between all the countries in this difficult time for all of us. Thank you for your attention.
Tijani Muhammad Bande, the President of the 74th session of the General Assembly of the United Nations. Please.
Chairman of the Non-Aligned Movement, President and Government, Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I thank the Chairman of the Non-Aligned Movement now, His Excellency Ilham Aliyev, President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, for convening this important virtual high-level meeting in response to the unprecedented threat of the rapidly evolving COVID-19 pandemic. I sincere condolences to those who have lost loved ones, and I wish those suffering from the disease a quick recovery. I thank healthcare workers and those on the front lines combating this disease, thereby keeping our communities safe and healthy. I commend the World Health Organization, member states, civil society, and private sector for providing vital support and services in the fight to defeat the pandemic. In the face of mounting challenges, we are reminded of the indispensability of multilateral alliances, which have, from the onset of this global challenge, coordinated the global response. We must continue to support the World Health Organization and one another to overcome this challenge and prevent future pandemics. I also call on those that have the capacity to financially support the United Nations COVID-19 Global Multilateral Response Plan to do so. Excellencies, COVID-19 has disrupted billions of lives with far-reaching effects on the health and livelihoods of people. The International Labour Organization estimates that workers will lose as much as $3.4 trillion in income by the end of 2020. Global health systems are under enormous stress, and global travel has been severely impacted. States, corporations, and families are already counting losses that could only be imagined in a state of war. While no country is spared from the scourge of this pandemic or its socio-economic impact, developing nations are bearing the heaviest brunt of it, even if they do not experience an outbreak of COVID-19. This pandemic is deepening pre-existing inequalities between and among nations, putting immense strain on tenuous systems and plunging those in the most precarious situations into deeper poverty and hunger. At the same time, rising debt levels severely limit the ability of the countries to provide essential public services such as healthcare and social protection. Compounding this is that amid the ongoing crisis, there are too many countries experiencing protracted armed conflict. I call on all countries and parties to conflict to support the United Nations Secretary General's call for a global ceasefire. We must strengthen international cooperation to create conditions for dialogue and ensure access to food and essential health supplies to those in need during this period of uncertainty. This crisis comes as we embark on the decade of action and delivery to implement the Sustainable Development Goals, and we risk losing the gains we have made. We pledge that we would leave no one behind by adopting Agenda 2030 for sustainable development. We must remain steadfast in our commitment to implement the agenda and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda on financing for development by demonstrating greater resolve and urgently galvanizing needed multilateral action. Excellencies, much like the United Nations, the non-aligned movement was founded in response to a period of distrust. A different era, but the situation was remarkably similar to today. Countries realized that the challenges facing them required much more than national efforts. I call on you to work in the same manner today to find solutions to our newest common challenge. To effectively fight COVID-19 and mitigate its wide-ranging effects, our recovery efforts and actions to achieve the SDGs must be aligned. We must engage all stakeholders, including governments, multilateral institutions, the private sector, and civil society, to ensure that we respond to the specific needs of communities, including through ensuring equal access to treatment and vaccines without discrimination. We must also safeguard the most vulnerable among us, including the elderly, people with underlying conditions, frontline workers, and the poorest members of our communities. Excellencies, given the importance of education and achieving the 2030 agenda, we must ensure that we urgently tackle the disruptions the pandemic has already caused to education around the world. With over 90% of the world's students affected by school closures, we must coordinate effectively and support each other to ensure that students around the world have access to quality education through remote learning. While it has been easier for developed countries to transit to remote learning, many governments around the world have found this difficult or impossible due to issues of internet penetration, lack of necessary software, hardware, and other necessary infrastructure. We cannot allow this pandemic to widen the educational gap that already exists. And I call on you to make cooperation key in the educational sector in your response to this pandemic. In addition, Excellencies, as many people around the world depend on agriculture for food and income, we must do our best to ensure that agricultural workers are able to function with minimum disruption. I urge your Excellencies to ensure increased investment in inclusive and resilient food systems that reflects our new reality and position us to better tackle the challenges they present, including the disproportionate risks faced by small island developing states, least developed countries, and commodity-exposing countries. As we contend with the COVID-19 pandemic, we must recommit to ending hunger and poverty. Excellencies, while swift action is also needed in the areas of debt relief and concession of finance to enable vulnerable countries to scale up health responses and provide social protection, we must remember that if public revenue generation systems now and in the future. Accordingly, we must continue to take concrete action to fight illicit financial flows in order to mobilize funds for essential public expenditure. We must defeat this menace and build financial systems that can withstand the effects of COVID-19 and the future shocks. Excellencies, I commend the leadership of NAM and its member states who have since the onset of this pandemic shown solidarity to fellow countries of Global South by exchanging best practices, donating medical equipment and supplies, as well as providing food and other humanitarian assistance. I urge the movement to continue to advocate for a mutually beneficial international economic space through the creation, development, and diffusion of new technologies and innovations within the framework of South-South cooperation. I'm grateful to NAM for the many ways it reinforces the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. This is evident in the role NAM member states played in the recent resolutions adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on solidarity and access to medicines and vaccines. I trust that the movement will continue to be a voice of reason and moderation and continue to work within the framework of the United Nations Charter and the Bandung Principles for International Peace and Security, the rule of law, justice, and sustainable development. I continue to work with you, Excellencies, to promote partnerships and galvanize the needed engagement to defeat COVID-19 and reduce its impact on all of us. Just as we have overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges in the past, will also overcome this together. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now I invite everybody to watch the video message by Mr. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations.
I thank President Aliyev of the Republic of Azerbaijan for convening this meeting. Our societies are being severely tested. COVID-19 has put the lives of billions of people around the world in turmoil, inflicting grave suffering and destabilizing the global economy. It has exposed the fragility of our societies and economies to shocks, and it has laid bare deep inequalities that threaten the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. The only answer is brave, visionary, and collaborative leadership. The scale and complexity of this crisis demand a coordinated global response. We must recognize that not enough solidarity has been shown to the developing countries. They need massive support, both to address gaps in their health systems as they deal with the pandemic, and to deal with the social and economic consequences for their societies. We must ensure that an effective response to COVID-19 reaches everyone, everywhere, and that equality prevails. With 2/3 of UN member states, the long-aligned movement has a critical role to play in forging global solidarity. We have 3 immediate priorities: to end the COVID-19 pandemic, to address its socio-economic impacts, and to use the recovery to build back better and leave no one behind. We cannot afford to fall short on the aspirations of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement on climate change. To that end, I reiterate the support of the United Nations for your efforts, and I wish you a productive meeting.
I thank Mr. Secretary General for this video message. And now the floor is given to Mr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, the Director General of the World Health Organization. Please.
Thank you. Your Excellency Ilham Aliyev, President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, distinguished heads of state and government, honorable ministers, dear colleagues and friends. It's an honor to join you today, and I thank His Excellency President Aliyev for inviting me to join. And we're sincerely grateful for the communique issued last month expressing the support of the non-aligned movement for the work we're doing at WHO. Thank you so much. I also give my warm thanks to the government and people of Azerbaijan for their contribution of $5 million to the fight against COVID-19. I would also like to thank His Excellency for allocating an additional $5 million to WHO to assist NAM countries. I'm pleased to be with you to convey WHO's full cooperation and support to the movement and its member states in the fight against COVID. As NAM marks the 65th anniversary of the 10 Bandung Principles this year, it's clear that multilateral cooperation is needed to ensure countries can respond effectively to COVID-19 while strengthening preparedness for other emergencies. It's also evident that no country, regardless of size or resources, can manage COVID-19 alone. Global solidarity based on national unity with a foundation of unity across political lines has never been more important than now. The virus has a combination of 2 dangerous elements. It moves fast and it's a killer. That's why we need national unity and global solidarity to beat it. In that way, that's how we can get ahead of the virus. And now more than ever, your continued multilateral engagement and your long-standing commitment to peace are vital for tackling COVID-19. Close partnership between countries is essential for building transparency, trust, and coordination, and for the governance and financing of emergency preparedness and response. In the face of this global emergency, the spirit of solidarity must be at the center of our efforts to unite peoples and nations. Since WHO declared COVID-19 a public health emergency in January, COVID-19 has spread throughout the world, disrupting health, economic, political, and social systems. This pandemic has highlighted the critical importance of local, national, and global emergency preparedness. The pandemic has reminded us of some simple truths as well. We're one humanity. We share the same planet, the same hopes and dreams, and the same fears. It has also underlined the importance of strong national and subnational health systems as the foundation of global health security and universal health coverage. While COVID has affected all segments of society, it also highlights the increased risks that most vulnerable and poorest face during crisis. This includes refugees, people living in conflict, and communities in post-war settings. Public health crises like COVID-19 jeopardize hard-won development gains and hamper progress towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. At this critical juncture of the pandemic, all countries and stakeholders, including those from the private sector, must work together to ensure that no one is left behind. Strengthening the values of multilateralism and international cooperation, which underpin the Charter of the Non-Aligned Movement, is key at this critical moment. WHO is supporting countries in their efforts to strengthen surveillance and early detection, isolate suspected cases, increase testing capacity, manage cases clinically, share information, work across sectors, and in risk communication and community engagement. While progress has been made in health security preparedness through instruments such as the international health regulations, gaps remain, and there is still wide variance in national preparedness. It's critical to accelerate action to improve preparedness capacities both within countries and at the global level. To break the cycle of panic and neglect, the world needs to shift from relying on reactive measures. Instead, we must focus our efforts on long-term preparedness, which depends on sustained multi-sectoral and multilateral engagement and a whole society approach. Excellencies, thank you again for your leadership and resolve in the fight against COVID-19. WHO remains committed to working with the non-aligned movement and supporting its member states to tackle COVID-19 and reinforce the critical principles of multilateralism, national unity, and global solidarity. With the support of the non-aligned movement, we can create the equitable, peaceful, and prosperous world that the movement's founders envisioned and achieve the ever more urgent goal, health for all. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Director General. Now I give the floor to Mr. Musa Faki Mahamat, Chairperson of the African Union Commission. Please.
Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to congratulate His Excellency Ilham Aliyev, the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, the current Chairman of the Non-Aligned Movement, on having taken the initiative of convening this meeting devoted to the response of the Non-Aligned Movement to COVID-19. I wish to stress that this conference is in line with the tragic realities of the moment. All the countries of the world are facing within their borders the challenge, unprecedented challenge of this pandemic. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the spread of coronavirus since the beginning of this year and its international management unfortunately have confirmed the unwelcome tendency noted that is for some time now the decline of multilateralism, solidarity, cooperation and mutual assistance. In Africa, we note that this is the moment when the world needs more multilateralism. This is the time when we note the weaknesses of multilateralism. Non-aligned movement has, since its inception at the Bandung Conference and the flag bearer of solidarity, friendship between the peoples of this vast entity in order to face the terrorism, the threat they are facing. Terrorism, transnational crime, the climate disaster, and today coronavirus, which knows no borders, race, religion, or social class. If the states to face this urgency imposed by this tragedy have acted individually, but it doesn't take anyway the extreme relevance of global collective action. There will be no definitive victory without all together we scoring a victory. In the fight against this imperative and global fight, the role of the non-aligned movement is crucial, considering the humanism, universalism of its fundamental principles. All the international, bilateral and multilateral partners, including the United Nations, are here being summoned and challenged so that together we act hand in hand against this enemy of mankind. On the ground of this fight against this virus, where the politics and ideologies are not prevailing, solidarity must be active, concrete and unwavering. It is only by acting in this way that we'll be able to break this chain of transmission of the virus from one country to another, from one region to another. However, this condition is not enough. You have to organize a chain, the chain of solidarity to help through equipment, pharmaceutical products, and to help the poorest countries. It is for me to congratulate the effective action of the World Health Organization and the leadership of the Director General Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, to whom I reiterate my support. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa, an essential part of the non-aligned movement, has adopted a strategy in response to the pandemic today, led by Africa CDC. It is based on two pillars, a health pillar and an economic and social pillar. A special fund has been established in order to face COVID-19. Furthermore, we have no doubt that this pandemic will trigger serious food crisis in Africa, where food security is already extremely fragile. Entire regions are probably threatened by the shortages and famine. The inevitable fall in the price of the raw materials is already felt. We expect to have serious disturbance and disruption of world trade, and particularly in Africa. Today, thousands of enterprises have been destroyed and millions of people are unemployed. And it is in this way that we are appealing not only for the suspension, but indeed the cancellation of debt of Africa. I call upon the non-aligned movement to support us in this struggle. Ladies and gentlemen, if Africa today has marked some important point against this enemy, it is due to the courageous measures, preventive measures taken by African states early. We know that it is this scourge which is progressing in some regions and is a state of the consequences will be disastrous for our structurally fragile economies. Africa indeed counts on its own effort and its capacity of resilience, and this is where our salvation lies. We are, however, open to international cooperation and appreciate highly the solidarity shown by our partners. And special mention is made for China and Cuba, which has sent equipment and other materials to Africa. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the world is going through one of its most critical times of its history. Consequently, the time is not for individualism and still less for divisions and political influence games. It is, in fact, the time for decisive action, which is complementary, selfless, and showing solidarity. I would like to appeal to the whole world for the need for political and economic governance, which is inclusive. We have, in fact, the obligation to reflect on this. This is the message that I want to convey to you in a broader manner from Africa. I thank you.
Much, Mr. Chairperson. And now I invite to watch the video message by Mr. Josep Borrell, the High Representative and Vice President of the European Commission.
Thank you for inviting me to address on behalf of the European Union. If ever we needed a reminder of how interconnected the world is, this pandemic, this crisis has provided it. This is a global wake-up call. Nobody will be safe in any country, in any region of the world, as long as the pandemic rages in different parts of the world. I salute the initiative of the non-aligned movement in calling this summit to support a coordinated multilateral approach. Defeating the pandemic will require a global approach and a coordinated response, but new and innovative multilateral partnerships will also be essential if we are to build a sustainable global recovery. The European Union has put its full weight behind the United Nations Secretary General's push to coordinate a United Nations-wide response and back his calls for a global ceasefire. This is an opportunity to revitalize the peace and security agenda in terms of conflict prevention, peace building, and strengthening of peacekeeping. Humanitarian access to vulnerable populations should not be hindered, and the World Health Organization should continue playing a critical role in containing the spread of the virus. The EU will continue to mobilize the necessary resources to support and safeguard the role of the World Health Organization in the multilateral system at this time of international health emergency. We will use the momentum of our draft resolution on COVID-19 at the World Health Assembly on the next 18th of May to gather support from other countries and regional groups. And I encourage the nations represented here today to rally behind this proposal. Tackling the current pandemic and building resilience against future epidemics must go hand in hand. We welcome the joint call for action by the World Health Organization and other global health organizations to develop a fast, universal, and equitable access to safe, quality, effective, and affordable diagnosis, therapeutics, and vaccines against coronavirus. Collectively, the European Union and its member states are the largest donor to the World Health Organization, and in 2019, the European Union alone provided 146 million euros in funding. We have stepped up our financial support to the World Health Organization, and the European Union is joining forces to quick start a pledging effort from today, 4th of May, to generate more than 7 billion euros. And beyond the immediate public health challenges, the international response must put people at the center, tackle inequalities, and uphold human rights for all. We must also minimize disruptions to the global transport and trade system and avoid export restrictions or bottlenecks in the supply chain, especially for food and medicines. As I said at the start, this pandemic recognizes no boundaries, and we have the tragic first-hand experience of that in Europe, and we will have to deal with the severe social and economic toll caused by the crisis in all European Union countries. However, this should not and does not prevent us from contributing significantly to the global fight against the pandemic. Our Team Europe package to support partner countries, in particular the most vulnerable, not least in Africa, to date, reaches more than 20 billion euros. And you aim today to establish a database of basic needs and requirements amongst your member countries can help us to ensure that the European Union's efforts in this regard are targeted as effectively as possible. We are beginning to understand how human health and planetary health are intertwined and how existing inequalities are making us more vulnerable. So let us learn the lessons. What's clear is that we need to do more, not less. Now more than ever, we should focus our collective efforts on the full implementation of Agenda 2030 and the Paris Agreement on climate change. This is an opportunity also. Let's use this opportunity to make sure that we shape a better version of the world tomorrow. A world where we reinforce multilateralism, not isolationism, a world that embraces the richness of our diversity and protects our citizens and our planet. It is our responsibility to demonstrate that together we can be more effective. Fighting the pandemic together will be essential to pave the way for a stronger, more multilateral cooperation during the recovery and a more multilateral world after the pandemic. We here at the European Union, we are ready and willing to work with all partners to this end.
I thank Mr. Josep Borrell for his video message. Dear colleagues, due to the time difference and number of participants, statements are requested to be limited to 7 minutes. Statements will be delivered based on English alphabetical order, first by the heads of states and then the heads of governments. Now I will give the floor to Mr. Mohammad Ashraf Ghani, the President of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. President Aliyev, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Heads of Agencies, and distinguished ministers. COVID-19 is a hyper event, plunging our interconnected world into turmoil by disrupting our normal modes of conduct and forms of sociability. Deep uncertainty regarding the future across the world therefore characterizes the COVID effect. We may never comprehend its complexity, but are likely to remember history as before and after COVID-19. Its effect is becoming clearer by the day as it wreaks havoc on lives and livelihood and poses an unparalleled challenge to our scientific capabilities and medical professionals. The scale and scope of its disruptive and destructive effect requires us to confront turmoil through robust collective action by taking risks, nurturing of solidarity, strengthening of bonds of citizenship, and pursuing strategies of cooperative advantage in regional and international relations. Excellencies, to stand united against COVID-19 is to choose alignment. As controlling COVID requires alignment at the level of humanity, we stand united in sympathy and solidarity with victims of COVID-19 across the world. We offer deep appreciation for the medical professionals and their heroic efforts and support the efforts of the global scientific community to win the race against COVID-19 in developing a vaccine. Our calling as public servants and our duty as heads of state and government make it imperative to think beyond the pain of the moment and to create the necessary alignments at the local, national, regional, and global levels to meet the expectations of our fellow human beings and fellow citizens for providing relief, recovery, and ushering of normalcy. To honor the spirit of non-alignment is to align the multilateral and national forms of cooperation in solidarity against COVID-19, and to restore and to resolve to prevent the collective gain of the movement against poverty, hunger, deprivation, inequality, and instability. The specter of COVID-19 is haunting the humanity. We need aligned actions and game-shaping strategies to marshal the true sense of urgency to overcome it. In Afghanistan, to lead and manage the response, we identified 5 phases: acknowledgement, diffusion, adversity, relief, and recovery. Following the premise that the duration of each phase, the scale and scope of its impact, and the response of the people will be uncertain. Intensive consultations enabled us to map our societal vulnerabilities and chart the expectations of our fellow citizens from their government. Working closely with actors in the market, we focused on ensuring of food and medicine security in coordination with our neighbors, near and far, to ensure the functioning of supply chains and value chains. Using
We have some internet problems in Afghanistan. Let's wait for that problem to be fixed.
Mr. President, I think you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now we hear you. Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Continue.
As listing all the countries, organizations, and individuals that have helped us will require a long time. Let me express gratitude for the assistance rendered to us in this global and regional hour of need. We're still in the phase of awareness and diffusion. We do not want to make predictions, but focus all our efforts on possible adversity in relief and recovery. War, unfortunately, casts a long shadow over our focused efforts against COVID-19. For the Taliban, have yet to accept our offer of a humanitarian ceasefire. We ask all members of the non-aligned movement to call upon Taliban to cease the senseless violence and engage in the political process to bring peace and prosperity to Afghanistan and the region. Excellencies, COVID-19 has disrupted our habits of normalcy as well as our assumptions of effectiveness and efficiency regarding institutions, organizations at the local, national, regional, and global levels. As the COVID-19 is as disruptive as World War II, overcoming its effect is going to require a true sense of urgency to re-examine the capacity, capability, and suitability of international institutions in regional organizations designed to meet the challenge of the mid-20th century and the subsequent decades of polarization. We, the Afghan people, who have suffered for 40 years from the games of polarization and conflict, would like to transform our country into a platform for regional and global cooperation. Please join us in this noble quest. Let me conclude by thanking President Aliyev for bringing us together and Prime Minister Modi for hosting the SAARC VTC earlier on COVID. We need these exchanges and forums to unite against COVID and plan a better world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. And now the floor is given to Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, the President of the People's Democratic Republic of Algeria. Please.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, Excellency President Ilham Aliyev, President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, Majesties, Highness, and Excellencies, I am pleased to express my thanks and my consideration to the friendly Republic of Azerbaijan for its active chairmanship of the non-aligned movement and the invitation to hold this summit, which will undoubtedly strengthen the cooperation and coordination amongst member states in all areas, especially in tackling the global crisis due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This crisis that is invading the whole world through this pandemic, COVID-19. I will seize this opportunity. I cannot fail to extend, in this word, I would like to express my condolences for the families of the victims of this pandemic. May the Almighty bestow His mercy upon them while praying for speedy recovery to those infected. Mr. President, this summit is held in extraordinary situation and in international context full of unilateral decisions taken to face an unprecedented pandemic in a way that is deeply worrying and challenging to all peoples and governments. And at the same time, it is a motivation to reinforce the multilateralism and to coordinate the efforts before the collective responsibility imposed by this situation. This context brings me to remind one of the most important principles of our movement, which is the consolidation of common interest and cooperation based on multilateral relations as a cornerstone in achieving the goals set up by the founding fathers of our movement. These goals stem from the spirit of the United Nations Charter and the Bandung Principles, and were strengthened by 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development Goals. The current challenges induced by this pandemic and its unprecedented impacts on all the socio-economic areas anticipate radical changes in the structure of international relations and urge the non-aligned movement as the largest international bloc within the United Nations to assume its responsibilities as a key international player in strengthening global peace and security, and that of an advocate for people's aspirations and fundamental rights, of which the right to universal health coverage is one of the solid pillars. The current crisis requires the reinforcement of coordination, cooperation and solidarity between the countries of our movement and take urgent measures to mitigate the severe consequences, which requires that our movement reaffirms its ability to adapt, to stand as a key player in the international order. Mr. President, with the rapid spread of this pandemic, all states complied with WHO recommendations, and I would like to thank, by the way, WHO by taking a set of decisions at the national level to support the preventive measures capable of slowing down this contagion. In this regard, since the first contamination, Algeria has set up the quarantine and reinforced the preventive measures and intensified awareness-raising campaigns towards citizens in order to increase the level of health awareness, knowing that the right to health and the universal health coverage in Algeria is enshrined in the constitution, is a right, constitutional right in Algeria based on a voluntary policy that includes all social categories without any discrimination or exclusion. Algeria also took several measures to optimize the available national human and material resources. Indeed, Algeria allocates and dedicates every year more than the third of its incomes to human development, which could contribute to the consolidation of the national capabilities in view of decreasing the propagation of the COVID-19 pandemic and reducing its impact. I cannot fail here to reiterate my support and gratitude to those working tirelessly and relentlessly at the front line to tackle this unusual challenge. On the other hand, I would say Algeria has put in place several solidarity emergency mechanisms in favor of categories affected by this situation through allocating financial assistance to fully take in charge the vulnerable categories in the society and the adoption of a plan aiming at minimizing the impact of this pandemic on the national economy, which will allow a swift return to a normal production pace. Besides, it provides all the necessary means to repatriate nationals stuck in different countries around the world, according to a well-thought plan, while taking the necessary safeguards. Mr. President, furthermore to what I just said, my country is deeply convinced that all these national efforts should be supported by further international measures based on cooperation and exchange of views and experiences in this area so as to strengthen the relations of brotherhood and solidarity between our countries and unite the efforts of our movement on one hand and the sub-regional and regional organizations and international players on the other hand. I would like to stress here the importance of an equitable and timely and effective access for all countries, particularly the developing ones, to any future COVID vaccines, as well as of supporting the efforts of WHO consistent with Resolution 27474 of the General Assembly. From this rostrum, I call on the UN Security Council to meet in the nearest possible future and to adopt a resolution through which it appeals solemnly for an immediate cessation of all hostilities all over the world, particularly in Libya and Yemen, without losing sight of the situation in territories and countries under occupation like in Palestine. It is imperative we strive to give all players, wherever conflicts exist, the opportunity to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. I also put forward the proposal to start thinking as from now on the elaboration of a work plan that enables us to alleviate as much as possible the repercussions of the pandemic everywhere in developing countries, especially in Africa, and to help revitalize all these countries which can be significantly affected by its impacts and its aftermath. Our movement principles require us to support the just causes and to disapprove unilateral measures that would hamper the international efforts to eradicate this pandemic and affect fundamental human rights, while renewing the call to lift the restrictions and barriers imposed on countries to enable them joining these efforts and ensure universal health coverage for their citizens. To conclude, I would like to reaffirm Algeria's full commitment to take part in all the endeavors under the aegis of the non-aligned movement in order to strengthen the ranks and reinforce the efforts to fight this pandemic. In this regard, I value the decision to put in place within the movement a task force which will be, among other things, a tool to exchange information and share experiences in fighting this pandemic in all phases. I also express my full readiness to contribute to the promotion of international efforts to contain this virus and mitigate its socio-economic consequences, hoping full success to member states' efforts and expressing that Algeria will be up to the level of the relations that tied us. Algeria is convinced that the continued success of our movement depends on its unity and the respect of its members' diversity, as well as valuing its ability to constructively interact with the rapidly changing international landscape, which reinforce our confidence in the future of the movement, which is an outstanding forum for expressing its people's aspirations and an effective framework to their achievement so as to serve the security, peace, stability, and decent living worldwide. Thank you for your kind attention, and peace be upon you. Thank you.
Mr. President, and now I give the floor to Mr. Miguel Díaz-Canel, the President of the Republic of Cuba. Please.
Your Excellencies, esteemed President Ilham Aliyev, distinguished heads of state and government, I thank Azerbaijan, the chair of NAM, for convening this meeting to have an exchange on the urgent and needed efforts which allow us to face COVID-19. I avail myself of this opportunity to congratulate Uganda, which shall assume the chair of NAM in 2022. While assuring Cuba's full support, we wish Uganda success in the performance of such duty. Due to its seriousness, I must denounce the terrorist attack with an assault rifle and the firing of over 30 rounds on our embassy in Washington, D.C. on April 30th. I demand from the U.S. government a thorough and swift investigation, harsh sanctions, security measures and guarantees for our diplomatic missions in its territory, as it must under the 1961 Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. Your Excellencies, NAM has shown its relevance in the present situation. That is attested by the communiques adopted in support of the WHO and concerning COVID-19, which call for global unity and international solidarity and cooperation, and also calling to put aside political differences and eliminating unilateral coercive measures which violate international law and the UN Charter and limit the state's ability to deal with the pandemic efficiently. We acknowledge the role played by the Azeri chair of NAM in the implementation of these initiatives. COVID-19 has proved itself to be a global challenge. It goes beyond borders, ideologies, or levels of development. Therefore, the answer to it must also be global and concerted, and it should put aside political differences. It is not possible to predict exactly the extent of its consequences. The high figures of infected persons and the death toll are showing its devastating impact in an increasingly interconnected world, which has not yet been able to use such interconnection for the sake of solidarity and is paying today the price for its inability to correct serious social imbalances. It should be stated openly. Had we made solidarity global, as it was done with the market, the story would have been different. Solidarity and cooperation are lacking. Those values cannot be replaced with profit-making, which is almost the only incentive for those who worship the market while forgetting about the value of human life. An analysis of the events that have disturbed humanity in the last 4 months must include the costly mistakes of neoliberal policies, which led to the downsizing of state management and capabilities, excessive privatizations, and a neglect of the majorities. This pandemic has evidenced the fragility of a fractured and excluding world. Not even those who are most fortunate and powerful would survive in the absence of those whose work create and sustain wealth. The multiple crises it is bringing about foretell ravaging and lasting effects for the economy and all areas of society. The pandemic is worsening the pressing problems in a planet riddled with deep inequalities, where 600 million people live in dire poverty and nearly half of the population have no access to basic health services, whose management is defined by the market and not by the noble goal of saving lives. In the meantime, global military expenditure is over $1.9 trillion, of which more than 38%, that is $732 billion, were appropriated in the United States in 2020. I wish to share with you this quotation from the Commander-in-Chief of the Cuban Revolution, Fidel Ruz, and I quote, "Instead of spending so much in the development of increasingly sophisticated weapons, those having resources for that should promote medical research and put the results of science at the service of humanity, thus creating tools for health and life and not for death," end quote. Let us call together with the UN Secretary General for the end of wars, including the unconventional ones, so as to safeguard the right to peace. We reject the recent and serious military threats by the government of the United States against the sisterly Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. We reaffirm our solidarity with the government and people of Nicaragua and reject measures against our right to well-being, security, and peace. The attempts at reimposing the neo-colonial past to our America by publicly declaring the validity of the Monroe Doctrine are contrary to the proclamation of Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace. In this complex situation, the U.S. is attacking multilateralism and unjustly disqualifying the role of international organizations, particularly the World Health Organization. Your Excellencies, at the 18th NAM Summit in Baku in October 2019, we called for the strengthening of the movement in face of international challenges convinced that only unity would save us. It is NAM's role to lead actions toward the elimination of the unpayable foreign debt which burdens our countries, and for the lifting of unilateral coercive measures imposed on some of our nations as they, together with the social and economic effects of COVID-19, are threatening the sustainable development of peoples. We must face selfishness and be aware that assistance from the industrialized North will be scarce. We have to complement each other, share what we have, support ourselves mutually, and learn from successful experiences. A useful choice could be resuming in the future the annual meetings of NAM health ministers in the framework of the World Health Assembly. Cuba stands ready to share its experiences with the NAM countries, which it is bound by historic ties of friendship. For Cuba, the challenge has been monumental. In the months prior to the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, we were already facing a ruthless tightening of the U.S. economic, commercial, and financial blockade policy aimed at bringing our trade and access to oil and foreign currency to a full standstill. Through tremendous effort and sacrifice, we've been able, under such conditions, to keep in place our universal and free public health system that's got dedicated and highly qualified professionals who enjoy world prestige in spite of the gross and slanderous campaigns by powerful adversaries. The early warning signs of the COVID-19 would become a pandemic in the midst of this suffocating context of an economic war, and that made challenges bigger. Right away, we came up with a plan with measures based on our main strengths: a well-organized state with a responsibility to look after the health of its citizens, and a society with mass involvement in decision-making and giving solutions to its problems. The work of resulting from years of resource appropriations to develop and strengthen health services and science has been put to the test, and the evolution of the epidemic in Cuba in the last 2 months is showing the good impact social investment policies may have when facing the biggest and most unexpected challenges. In spite of the huge constraints imposed on us by the protracted U.S. economic, commercial, and financial blockade that are posing a big daily challenge to keeping our public health system in place and facing this pandemic in particular, we have ensured the right to health of the Cuban people with the involvement of society as a whole. Scientific development has allowed us to treat different communicable diseases successfully, both in Cuba and elsewhere. The pharmaceutical industry has expanded the manufacture of drugs of proven efficacy to prevent and deal with COVID-19 that we have shared with other countries. In response to requests that were made, in the last month, 25 new brigades of Cuban health professionals have joined the efforts of 23 countries to fight the pandemic. They have joined those who have been already providing services in 59 states, many of which are NAM members. Cuba shall not give up its solidarity vocation, even when, out of political reasons, the U.S. government continues to attack and hinder Cuba's international cooperation, which jeopardizes access to health services for tens of millions of people. Your Excellencies, we have a responsibility to combine our willingness and efforts to face this immense challenge. Let us promote international cooperation and solidarity. Our endeavor shall be decisive. Let us do it for the right of our peoples to health, peace, and development, fully abiding by the NAM founding principles. Let us do it for life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. And now I give the floor to Mr. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the President of the Arab Republic of Egypt.
In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful, Your Excellency, President Ilham Aliyev, President of the Brotherly Republic of Azerbaijan, Your Highnesses and Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I express thanks and appreciation to Your Excellency, Mr. President, for your kind initiative to call for the convening of this online summit in an extremely important time. As we all face the risks and threats entailed by the COVID-19 pandemic, I seize the moment to express the deepest condolences to the families of the corona victims all over the world and to wish the infected a speedy recovery. Egypt highly recognizes the role of everyone who, through their work or profession, contributes to fighting the pandemic and mitigating its far-reaching effects, the matter that requires consolidated collaboration. I would like also to extend congratulations for the holy month of Ramadan, which inspires us with sublime values of human solidarity and fraternity. Mr. President, our world today is witnessing a catastrophic health crisis, unprecedented in its scope and expansion, as well as the magnitude of its political, economic, and social implications. Politically, the pandemic has overwhelmed the whole world, showing no distinction between political, continental, or cultural boundaries. The impact is so rife that countries are forced to cocoon, self-isolate, and lock their borders. Economically, the crisis undermines economic and development gains globally achieved. Socially, the pandemic raises several questions which have been subject to different practices by the countries, such as voluntary versus compulsory curfews, and balancing between maintaining hygiene and social distancing while avoiding economic losses with dire consequences at the same time. Our choice is clear, for there is no alternative but to globally consolidate in countering this crisis. Out of our belief in our common destiny, this is what our summit materializes today. Accordingly, Egypt stresses the need, more than ever, to further activate the mechanisms of international synergies and joint action for a quick and effective response to this crisis. The non-aligned movement should undertake a key role to this effect. Our movement enjoys a tremendous international leverage, having almost two-thirds of the UN member states and representing a broad and important platform for aligning the stands of developing countries on the various political, economic, and social issues on the world order agenda. This provides it with an added value in fighting the spread of the corona pandemic. Along these lines, Egypt, being one of the founders of the non-aligned movement, endorses the movement's taking the initiative of coordinating the stances of its member states on the coronavirus in a framework of collective multilateral action. In this respect, allow me to share with you the following points. First, we stress the importance of ensuring medical and preventive requirements necessary for enabling the movement member states to strengthen their capacities for an effective response to the pandemic, especially the most needy countries, notably those who are undergoing current or post-conflict conditions. Second, international cooperation should be intensified and necessary funds should be mobilized to serve the purposes of meaningful scientific research, so that efforts are accelerated to find a treatment and a vaccine for coronavirus, making sure all countries and communities have an unqualified access to it, in addition to stopping the effects of the virus on the societies. Third, international efforts should unite to support developing countries and provide incentive packages to their economies, including relief of accumulated debts through debt forgiveness and rescheduling. Here I underpin the enormous pressures and challenges particularly faced by the African continent in this regard. I also highlight the initiatives proposed by the AU Bureau to mitigate the impact of the crisis on the African countries and peoples. Fourth, we cannot overlook the importance of taking advantage of the available instruments of international funding institutions, most importantly the World Bank and the IMF, to help countries contain the negative economic effects of the pandemic and reactivate the vital economic sectors in the countries of the movement. Fifth, we need to reduce the impact of the pandemic on food security and ensure the flow of humanitarian aids to the world's most needy people through maintaining global supply chains and opening humanitarian corridors, in addition to balancing between border restrictions and accessibility of trade. Sixth and finally, Egypt calls for allowing room in areas of conflicts for health and humanitarian efforts to play the role in fighting coronavirus, and for benefiting from calming confrontations down to pursue political tracks for a sustained resolution of such conflicts, while making sure that this is done with all due respect of the international law. Mr. President, the COVID-19 pandemic has put the mechanisms of the current world order in a real test. This situation underscores the necessity to deepen the principle of cooperation and solidarity. In the meantime, there should be our movement should cope with the conditions and challenges lived by our today's world. It follows that the movement should keep on developing its mechanisms, making them more efficient in dealing with the major changes on the global arena. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate my thanks to you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important summit. We endorse the final communiqué that will be issued by the summit. I wish all the success to your presidency of the movement in realizing the goals and principles that the non-aligned movement was established to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now I give the floor to Mr. Joko Widodo, the President of the Republic of Indonesia. Please.
Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, 59 years ago, non-aligned movement was established to fight our common enemy, imperialism and neo-colonialism. Today, COVID-19 is our common enemy. Developing countries' economy is projected to decline by 2%. A loss of income of $220 and 500 million people falling into poverty. Mr. Chairman, the pandemic is far from over. We must act swiftly, diligently, and strategically. Allow me to convey 3 important points that needs to be strategically prioritized by NAM countries. First, strengthening our political solidarity. Let's fully focus our time and energy to face this challenge. Second, translate this political solidarity into concrete cooperation. We must strive for equitable and access to medicine and vaccines to cure COVID-19 with affordable prices. And intellectual property regimes must implement flexibility, humanity. Let's strengthen our cooperation to recover global supply chain in food and medical goods. Third, strengthening global partnership among developing countries. We must voice out and strive for commitment in development aid and humanitarian assistance, debt relief, and adjusting payment obligation to finance COVID-19 response or debt swap for COVID-19 from official creditors. The G20 commitment for debt suspension for low-income countries must be implemented. Mr. Chairman, multilateralism must remain the platform for international cooperation. Going forward, developing countries must strive to improve global health governance to better prepare in dealing with future pandemic. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now I give the floor to Mr. Hassan Rouhani, the President of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Praise may be to God and His Prophet and His household and companions. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at this very outset, I should like to offer my gratitude and appreciation to His Excellency Mr. Ilham Aliyev, the Honorable President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, for the organization of this summit, but also for his assistance to my country in battle against COVID-19. I would also like to thank all non-aligned movement member states, as also other countries, that succored one another in the global fight against the international threat of COVID-19. The global experience from the combat against COVID-19 proved how a communicable disease could constitute a threat to all world countries, irrespective of their borders, nationality, or race, and how it could put on the line the health of every single individual in the world. This is a serious cause for alarm to all states. Alarm that humans are already subject to more than enough major threats, including environmental degradation, global warming, and other natural threats, coronavirus being a particular case in point. It is time, pressure and threat, terrorism nurturing, and coercion of nations through recourse to economic terrorism and military threat made way for bilateral, multilateral, and international cooperation towards fight against real and shared threats. This experience showed that the world powers with arsenals loaded with weapons of mass destruction are no less, if not more, vulnerable to the threat of a communicable disease, the like of COVID-19. With this in perspective, within few days from the onset of the global outbreak, the Islamic Republic of Iran began cooperating with the World Health Organization as per international health regulations, otherwise known as IHR, and drew up a targeted national strategic program to combat the virus, collaborating with other world countries to boot. This national strategic program includes the following. 1. Responding to crisis by adopting a whole-of-government approach soliciting the participation of all responsible institutions and the whole of society, and by promoting intersectoral cooperation, all within a health for all approach. 2. Initiating national combat against COVID-19 through telephone and online disease surveillance, and by recruiting 170,000 healthcare staff, appointing 1,000 designated comprehensive health centers, setting up a self-screening system, and operating quarantine facilities to detect and offer complementary treatment to the cases of COVID-19. 3. Creating a disease diagnosis and management network, inclusive of laboratory testing and diagnostic algorithms. 4. Enforcing social distancing policies. 5. Managing health and biomedical research. And 6. Producing protection packages for low-income vulnerable strata affected by restrictions imposed. As a result of these measures, the Islamic Republic of Iran has thus far managed to effectively contain the outbreak in many cities and regions across the country. The Islamic Republic of Iran's performance in controlling the virus has, in certain instances, been assessed as surpassing international standards. Notwithstanding the Islamic Republic of Iran's targeted course of action to counter the outbreak will continue to persist at the country and regional level. Ladies, gentlemen, at a time when the coronavirus has come to be a common threat to global security and public health, at a time when the World Health Organization is leading in the front line, the global battle against the threat of the coronavirus, undermining the World Health Organization would mean undermining the joint global fight against the coronavirus, and would therefore be but utterly untimely and unjustifiable. The United States government's hasty and irresponsible action in depriving the WHO of its much-needed finances should be considered yet another strategic error on the part of this administration. An error which would challenge the global joint battle against the coronavirus. Indeed, one could not have expected otherwise of a US administration that has time and again withdrawn unilaterally from valid international accords and has repeatedly violated international law. With its unilateral and unlawful sanctions of years, not only has the United States of America deprived the people of Iran from access to their rights, but its measures are to be countered as a threat to multilateralism and international cooperation. Whilst every country in the world is planning to counter this threat and is fostering cooperation with other countries to obtain necessary supplies, Iran, distressing as it is, has been unable to procure its requirements of pharmaceutical items and medical equipment, and that due to the US illegal and unilateral sanctions which prevent supply companies from timely delivery of supplies to Iran. As a result of this anti-humanitarian act on the part of the United States, the course of procurement of Iran's medical needs has become more protracted, if impossible at times, besetting Iran's targeted outbreak control program with problems and challenges. At this stage, I would like to take the opportunity and offer my appreciation to all the doctors, nurses, and health personnel in the Islamic Republic of Iran, as also in other countries, who are at the front line of the fight against the virus. I need to underscore here that the Islamic Republic of Iran declares its preparedness to cooperate and welcomes offers of cooperation with all world countries towards the development of a vaccine and a definitive cure for the disease. In conclusion, I would like to once again thank my dear friend and brother, His Excellency Mr. Ilham Aliyev, the Honorable President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, as well as other leaders and dignitaries present in this summit. While inviting to cooperation and collaboration in the fight against the virus, I wish for Your Excellency's good health and hope for the global disappearance of the virus sooner rather than later. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. President. And now I give the floor to Mr. Mohammed Ould Ghazouani, the President of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania.
The President, the Chairperson of the AU Commission, ladies and gentlemen, the fact that we are urged today to hold this summit through video conference is a light impact compared to the serious effect of the emerging pandemic coronavirus, which we are trying today to study its implications and ways to address them. The pandemic of COVID-19 has formed, by virtue of its rapid spread, a pandemic by all measures, and in addition to its deadly effect, has paralyzed economic activity and reduced the volume of exchanges, and foreshadows its impacts will cover deeply all the social and security development levels. Therefore, in face of the effect of this pandemic, all international efforts must be combined within the framework of a comprehensive strategy that notes the various dimensions of the impact of this pandemic. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the Islamic Republic of Mauritania developed early on a national strategy to confront the spread of coronavirus. On the one hand, aimed at preventing the spread of the virus and outbreak of infection through a series of precautionary and preventive measures, and on the other hand, to mitigate the impact of these measures on the living conditions of citizens, especially the poor. Among the precautionary measures taken in this context, closure of our airspace to all commercial flights, closure of all our land borders, imposing a quarantine on all arrivals before the borders closure, a ban on interstate mobility, imposing nationwide curfew, closure of all schools at the university, all schools and universities, closure of all markets and public places, a ban on all activities and events that entail large gatherings. These measures, thank God, have yielded positive results and have so far allowed to avoid the widespread of this pandemic in our country, so that only 8 cases have been recorded to date, including 1 death and 6 recovered cases. Praise be to God. C'est parti le soir. C'est parti. Parce qu'il était en train de feuilleter. These measures, thank God, have yielded positive results and have so allowed to avoid widespread. And since these measures have a strong impact on the livelihoods of citizens, we have created a special fund for social solidarity and combating the new coronavirus, for which the state has allocated significant sums. Citizens, businessmen, and various groups and civil society organizations have also risen in a national surge, a broad national surge, to contribute to it. This fund aims to mitigate the effects of this pandemic on vulnerable groups by acquiring the country's needs of medicine, equipment, and medical supplies linked to the pandemic, supporting tens of thousands of families in need of food and cash, and covering their electricity and water bills. Waiving all taxes and customs duty on basic foodstuff, waiving a large portion of taxes on professionals and small activities and families working in the traditional fishing sector. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, my country understands that the measures that countries have taken individually in this situation, whatsoever their domestic and circumstantial efficiency, will not be sufficient to meet the challenges resulting from this pandemic in its multiple dimensions: health, economic, and social. Our firm conviction is that the international community can win over this pandemic only through solidarity and cooperation between all countries. On this basis, our country has launched at the highest level a diplomatic dynamic based on continuous communication and consultation with all brotherly and friendly countries and all international partners on all issues related to this pandemic. In this context, I presided personally as a president of the G5 Sahel on April 27 via video conference an extraordinary summit of the organization, which resulted in the Nouakchott Declaration, in which the leaders of the group draw the attention of the international community to what experts expect from the coronavirus pandemic. They may drive whole societies into a circle of fragility threaten food security in many countries and erode their sustainable development hopes and goals. And this summit launched an appeal for a complete and comprehensive cancellation of the African continent's debt, an appeal that I invite you, Mr. President, to support. I also congratulate the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, on his work in this regard. I also presided as well on April 28th, alongside the President of the EU Council, Mr. Charles Michel, and through a video conference, as well through the summit of G5 Sahel European Union Summit. This summit stressed the necessity of the urgent solidarity of the international community in order to respond effectively to the risk of the spread of the spread of the coronavirus pandemic in the world, in Africa, and in the Sahel region in particular, and work to reduce the expected health and economic impacts as well. Thus, let me call on behalf of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania, the leaders of our countries gathered here today, to push for more concerted efforts and experiences to intensify coordination and cooperation among all countries in the world to respond in strong and innovative ways to the great challenges presented by this unprecedented crisis in history. In this regard, our country salutes the first initiatives that were taken at the level of the G20, the Paris Club, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank towards reducing the debt of the poorest countries. But we consider that the only solution lies in canceling the external debt of these countries due to the size of the various challenges they face today. In this respect, I can't fail to renew our country's support for the just humanitarian causes that have been supported by the non-aligned movement from its outset. On top of which, and here I insist on the support of our country to these just and fair cases that has been supported by the non-aligned movement from its outset, on top of which is the cause of the brotherly Palestinian people, for whom we demand the restoration of their historical rights, including the establishment of the independent state with its capital, Al-Quds Sharqiyya. Finally, let me thank you and thank the organizers for organizing this summit, for the wonderful work they have accomplished. Wishing great success for our deliberations. Peace and the mercy of God be upon you.
Now the floor is given to Mr. Daniel Ortega, the President of the Republic of Nicaragua.
Thank you. Brother President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, our greetings to your people. And our condolences to the peoples of all the world. In particular, to the families that have suffered the deaths of their loved ones because of this pandemic. We take the calls that you have made towards solidarity. And we express that once again, the rules, the norms of the international law are being violating, compromising all of humanity. I mean, the pandemic of COVID-19 has not stopped the pandemic of violating the principles of the United Nations. Even worse, some are taking advantage of the pandemic to reinforce the illegal aggressions against brother peoples of the world. Seven years ago, here in Nicaragua, we faced once again the invasion of the Yankee army. North American Yankee armies continue occupying territories. And the US government continues its aggressions against peoples in different countries of the world. Actions such as the ones launched by the government of the United States actions launched against the president of the Brotherly Republic of Venezuela and other leaders of that country, where the government of the United States offers a reward of $15 million, the head of the president, or the head of the president, the legitimate president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Or criminal? Because it's calling for the murder, for the assassination of a head of government, a head of state. Trying once again this pandemic to intervene militarily in Venezuela. Deploying and naval forces with the under the pretext of combating drug trafficking and organized crime. Should be combating drug trafficking and organized crime within the United States, which is the main consumer of drugs in the world. I think we're facing the pandemic of hunger. We all know this. And hunger is caused by savage capitalism. Face the pandemic. And we face the pandemic of the violation of the human rights of entire peoples. And I have to mention Cuba. where, where instead of eliminating the illegal sanctions imposed against Cuba, they are being reinforced. And truly terroristic acts are being promoted. The world's greatest terrorists are the United States, those who try to enact illegal sanctions against the peoples of the world, enact sanctions against Cuba, because the United Nations has not approved any economic sanctions against Cuba. In the middle of the pandemic, they promote the taking of more of the Palestinian territory, Palestinian land. And if we speak about Libya, we know exactly who caused the destruction of Libya. It was NATO bombing freely and destroying an entire nation. I truly believe that the worst pandemic that the world faces is the pandemic of force, the use of force or the threat of use of force, the pandemic of war that is being promoted especially by the government of the United States. We face the pandemic of global climate change. Face the pandemic of the weakening of the most important organizations that the United Nations has. Organizations that have to do with the essential rights that the peoples of the world have. That have to do with with survival of the planet itself and survival of the human species. As we face this pandemic, as we face this this challenge that unites some of us but does not unite all of us, the peoples and governments that are members of the non-aligned movement have to unite now more than ever. Our spirit of solidarity, our respect and appropriation of international law. And in this way, use the influence of our movement to change this terrible model that has so many million people all over the world suffering from violations of human rights. May Let's work towards suspending these aggressions that they call sanctions. Promote respect for the principles of United Nations. And that would be enough for the world to begin to move forward. And then we would be in a better position, in better conditions to face the challenges that humanity is facing. To truly achieve peace and justice for the peoples of this planet. Thank you very much, dear President.
Thank you, Mr. President. And now I give the floor to Mr. Muhammadu Buhari, the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
Your Excellency Ilham Aliyev, President of the Republic of Abidjan and Chair of the Non-Aligned Movement. Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government of the Non-Aligned Movement countries, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me start by extending my profound gratitude to the Chair, His Excellency Ilham Aliyev, for convening this extraordinary summit at a critical moment when the world is grappling with the stark reality and far-reaching consequences of COVID-19 pandemic. Let me also convey Nigeria's solidarity with all the member states as we strive individually and collectively to contain and defeat this pandemic, which continues to ravage humanity and cause an unprecedented devastation to the well-being of our people, their livelihoods, and the global economy. May I, at this point, express my sincere condolences to the families and members states who have lost their loved ones and citizens to this pandemic. I also wish the infected victims speedy and full recovery. Mr. Chairman, the theme of this extraordinary summit, United Against COVID-19 Pandemic, aptly reflects the importance of a proactive approach and the need for multilateral cooperation in finding quick solutions to the challenges that COVID-19 pandemic poses to our nations. Since the outbreak of the disease, countries have made concerted efforts to limit the spread of the pandemic within and outside their borders, as well as treating those infected by the virus. 2 weeks ago, we in West Africa came together to work out a common sub-regional response to the crisis. The summit appointed me the champion to lead our efforts on fighting the pandemic in our region. Excellencies, in our endeavor to fight the COVID-19 pandemic at the national level, we established Presidential Task Force, a 12-member team of senior officials to control the spread of the virus in Nigeria and coordinate our national response. We have also empowered our nation's Center for Disease Control as we have embarked on intensive enlightenment and sensitization campaigns by providing regular updates and accurate information to Nigerians on the dangers of COVID-19. As part of our measures, we have closed our land borders and airports and reduced seaport activities in a bid to curb imported cases from entering the country. Unfortunately, the number of confirmed cases continues to rise as a result of community transmission of the disease. Accordingly, we have increased our efforts to monitor trends of the disease, establish more isolation centers, and stepped up testing at the community level and of potentially vulnerable groups. To cushion the effect of COVID-19 arising from the lockdown, we impose to limit the spread of the disease. The government of Nigeria has put in place relative measures to alleviate the suffering of the poor and vulnerable households whose conditions have been worsened by the outbreak of the novel virus. We have provided various relief materials, including medical and food supplies, as well as conditional cash transfer to about 3.6 million vulnerable households affected by stay-at-home order. We also responded to the economic needs of our people by supporting households and micro, small, and medium enterprises affected by COVID-19 induced economic downturn. Nigerian government has so far provided resources to Nigeria's Center for Disease Control for the purchase of test kits, construction and functioning of isolation centers, training of medical personnel, and providing of insurance for frontline health workers. Excellencies, there is no doubt that the task ahead is daunting, and more needs to be done to reduce the impact of COVID-19 on our countries. It is now clearly evident that no nation can independently and single-handedly tackle a pandemic of this nature, which is no respecter of borders, regions, or status. Inevitably, enhancing multilateral cooperation through exchange and sharing of best practices is imperative to overcome the disease. We must therefore form a united front against this common enemy by being coordinated and timely in our response. Furthermore, we must all encourage and empower our scientists and medical experts to join the quest for a vaccine and cure to this universal plague. In addition, we must acknowledge the central role of the United Nations and the World Health Organization in fighting the pandemic. It is therefore essential to fully collaborate and support their initiatives in coordinating the international fight against the pandemic. Such efforts should include the protection of our medical workers, the provision of medical supplies, especially test kits, and ultimately finding a vaccine to cure the disease. Mr. Chairman and Excellencies, let me state that in the spirit of solidarity, we must collectively appeal to international financial institutions to assist member states in cushioning the negative impact of the pandemic. In this regard, I urge them to extend concessional loans, technical assistance support, lowering of tariff on medical equipment and consumables, sharing of exercise in case management, adopting open trade policies, as well as outright debt cancellation to our member countries. Within the spirit of South-South cooperation, we must also assist our other, particularly the less developed and less endowed member states with technical, medical, and financial assistance. It is by so doing that we can rightly claim to uphold the Bandung principle of equality, mutual interest, and cooperation. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now I give the floor to Mr. Arif Alvi, the President of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Your Excellency, my brother Mr. Ilham Aliyev, President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, honorable heads of member and observer states, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. At the outset, let me thank President Aliyev and the government of Azerbaijan for this timely initiative. I would like to express our full solidarity with the people of NAM, member states in the fight against COVID-19. I will also like to avail this opportunity to convey sincere condolences to those who have lost their loved ones and pray for quick recovery for those affected by the virus. Mr. Chairman, the impact of COVID-19 has exposed the fragility of our global system and the enormity of the challenges we face. Around half of the world population, about 3.5 billion people, are in a lockdown and with no end in sight. Tens of millions of people have lost their jobs across the globe, and the count is increasing. Lives have been disrupted and people have been deprived of their livelihoods. Countless families across the globe are struggling to remain safe, to secure health attention, and even more, avoid death from hunger. Global supply chains are breaking down. Factories, restaurants, shops, small businesses, and hotels have laid off workers. A global recession is surely underway, and the world GDP is projected to decline by at least 10%. The crisis triggered by the pandemic is also a stark reminder that no country can overcome such threats alone. A global challenge requires a global response, which is firmly rooted in solidarity, international cooperation, and respect for multilateralism. The Bandung principles remain relevant today in the face of evolving challenges. These principles, grounded in friendly cooperation and respect for the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, offer opportunities to address contemporary threats, evolving new avenues of cooperation. We are confident that today's meeting would help in formulating effective approaches to address the challenges ahead of us. Mr. Chairman, Pakistan is located in a region where two of our immediate neighbors have been severely impacted by COVID-19. We undertook a range of measures at an early stage to mitigate its spread and address its effects. A robust institutional mechanism was set up to ensure a unified response. Wide-ranging measures were introduced to check the spread of the virus, and these included restrictions on international and domestic travel, school closures, restriction on public gatherings, localized quarantines, strengthening of country-wide health response, and varying levels of lockdowns in our cities throughout the country. Massive screening and testing was done, surveillance was done. We launched a huge information campaign to raise awareness among the public that also helped our timely responses. Our three-pronged response of preventing COVID-19 from spreading, suppressing it, and mitigating its impact have largely been effective, as Pakistan is still in the containment phase. In order to address the social and economic impact of the pandemic, our Prime Minister, Mr. Imran Khan, launched a package of approximately $8 billion for vulnerable groups, covering relief measures in cash that was distributed directly to 12 million families, and that included daily wage workers, low-income groups, financial support for SMEs, support for health and food supplies, and for procurement of emergency services. Additionally, the government is expanding the network of shelter homes and panagas. Even in this crisis, besides the government of Pakistan, I am indebted to the hugely generous people of Pakistan who are helping the poor fight this crisis. And we have instructed relevant departments to not refuse any refugee access to health facilities and medicine. However, we are requesting the United Nations, the High Commissioner for Refugees, and International Organization for Migration to come forward and help to assist the Afghan refugees, both documented and those who are undocumented. I would like to especially highlight that our bloodily country of Afghanistan deserves enhanced international attention and support to strengthen their health systems to respond to COVID-19 challenges. Mr. Chairman, national responses, however, cannot be fully effective unless complemented by strong international cooperation and mobilization of much-needed resources. While the pandemic is primarily a health crisis, its social and economic impacts are far-reaching and devastating. It has exposed the fragility of our societies and economies to shocks, laying bare deep inequalities and threatened the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Developing countries are likely to suffer from massive poverty, unemployment, and social unrest against the backdrop of a sharp economic downturn. In view of the pandemic's socio-economic impacts on developing countries, Prime Minister Imran Khan has called for a global initiative on debt relief, which aims to seek urgent debt relief for low-income and middle-income countries. Developing countries must be supported in overcoming the massive impact of COVID-19 by providing fiscal space and financial relief many civilians. Mr. Chairman, this unprecedented into opportunity to create a more equitable that can enable countries make progress towards sustainable development goals and ensure an interconnected world, increasingly globalized world. Our policies and responses to such a crisis leave no one behind. That one, all skirmishes, war-like situations must be ceased so that countries can focus on health. Number two, that our efforts to handle COVID-19 should stay clear of politicization and pursuit of narrow agendas. Number three, that there should be an urgent global initiative on debt relief. Number four, that there should be strong efforts by governments to discourage intolerance and discrimination, incitement to hatred, etc. because of COVID-19 and to ensure equal health access to all people. And number five, that a major effort with particular focus on the poorest of the world for their relief and for revival of economies must be done so that livelihoods may be restored at the earliest. Mr. Chairman, the world has never been in a more serious crisis, which loudly demands that leaders of the world should rise and lift humanity out of its misery and save the world as we know it, indeed to improve on it. Pakistan stands ready to support you and work closely with Your Excellency in this endeavor. I thank you all, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. President. And now the floor is given to Mr. Mahmoud Abbas, the President of the State of Palestine.
By the name of Allah the Most Gracious, His Excellency President Ilham Aliyev, Majesties, Excellencies, distinguished heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen, peace be upon you. Allow me at the outset to express our appreciation and gratitude to His Excellency President Ilham Aliyev for his initiative to convene this important meeting in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, which constitutes the gravest humanitarian crisis witnessed by humanity in modern era. We also welcome all participating heads of states, governments, and delegations. This summit constitutes a critical opportunity for the leaders of the non-aligned movement to contribute by presenting their ideas as well as exchanging and coordinating positions on the best avenues to confront the challenges and repercussions caused by this pandemic and overcome them, and also to consolidate cooperation and solidarity as well as support for international response in these exceptional circumstances of our countries and the world as a whole. This dangerous pandemic is spreading in unprecedented way, affecting all humanity, which requires undertaking the necessary medical, economic, and social measures to protect our nations and peoples. Mr. President, Excellencies, the State of Palestine has declared as early as 5th of March 2020 a state of emergency and took decisive preventive measures that have helped to greatly mitigate the number of people infected despite our scarce of resources. These measures included shutting down international crossings from and to Palestine, restricting movement between the cities and isolating infected areas. And in addition, we shut down schools, universities, mosques, and churches. We have also prevented all forms of public gatherings and created quarantine centers as well as testing centers and treatment facilities throughout the districts. By doing this, we followed the path of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who was the first to legislate such exceptional measures